everybody, this is Damien from Legend Live. With our bucket list talks, we look to share tips, ideas and inspiration to help you create and live your bucket list. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with David Foote. David is the founder of David Foote Safaris and also Ride Botswana, a company that provides private safaris, riding safaris and walking safaris in Botswana. Today David's going to give us the lowdown on what you can look forward to if you choose to travel to Botswana, and then why you should actually consider Botswana as a destination. So how are you going today, David?
Yeah, hi Damon. Yeah, no, we're great here. Thanks very much. Just going into starting to go into winter in Botswana, so it's cooling down nicely, enjoying the temperature.
Very good. So to get started, maybe you can give us a little bit of a background about yourself, because I believe you have lived in other parts of Africa and then now live in Botswana. So perhaps talk a little bit about the places you've lived and then what brought you to Botswana.
Yeah, of course. Well, I was born and raised in Malawi, probably even a lesser known country in Africa. My grandfather had moved out there in 1920. So yeah, that's where I grew up, and obviously, was lucky enough to have parents who loved going out into the bush, so I had an early exposure to that. And but then they made an unusual decision and sent me to a school and university in England, which was a little shock.
Yeah.
But I guess pretty good place to be as a teenager, and a lot more pubs there than there are in Malawi. And but then, yeah, as soon as I finished university, I thought, I've got to get back to Africa. So I actually bought an old Bedford truck with a couple of friends, and we spent 6 months doing it up, and then, yeah, 8 months returning from driving from London to Johannesburg. That was back in the mid '80s, and it was a fabulous way to return to Africa. Really just a slow way to come back in and really immerse oneself back into the whole continent. And of course, with what ultimately, the career I've had in the safari industry, it was a brilliant way to, an opportunity to visit as many different countries and national parks, which is always, meant I've always, a really good background to other countries, not just the country I operate in. And then, to be honest, I didn't think I was going to go into the safari industry, but the longer this trip went on, you meet people and you have lucky breaks, and I was given some incredibly lucky breaks. I met a guy who had pioneered a lodge on Lake Kariba in Zimbabwe right through the heart of the Rhodesian Civil War. So incredible what he had achieved. An amazing, inspirational guy. And he, of course, we hit it off because he had driven across Africa, 10, 15 years before. And so he said, well, come and work for me. And that's how it all started in the safari business in Zimbabwe. I was fortunate enough, he also had a camp in the famous Mana Pools down on the Zambezi. I spent a lot of time there. Of course, it was the really early days of the photographic safari industry then. So very different to what it is now.
Yep.
And and then I went up to Zambia, to the Luangwa Valley, another one of the greatest wildlife areas in Africa, and spent a number of years working there with another extremely well-known safari operator. And that's where we developed love of the walking safaris. The Luangwa Valley is the home of the walking safaris, for for a commercial basis. A chap called Norman Carr was the first to offer them back in the 1960s there. But I'd always, obviously always wanted to, I suppose, an independent spirit, always wanted to run my own business. And the guy I was working for said, well, I've got some guests who they want to go to Malawi. And I said, well, let me go and set up a business back home, my original home, and I'll take them around Malawi. So that's how it started. In 1990, and built up a safari business there for many years, which ended up right up in the north. We were incredibly privileged. We had the exclusive tourism rights to 4,000 square kilometers, some of the most beautiful parts of Africa there are. We but then 13 years ago, we left and came down to Botswana, which, you know, it's a story for another time, but unfortunately we got caught up in a corruption scandal between the Malawi government and some people from Abu Dhabi. So
Okay.
that was the end of our time in Malawi. But to be honest, you know, when you love, you know, the African bush, it doesn't matter where you are. And I mean, obviously, from a business point of view, it wasn't great losing everything and having to start again.
Yeah.
In your 40s.
Yeah.
When you don't think, you know, you've convinced me otherwise earlier, Damon, that you have got as much energy in your 40s. You have as much energy in your 40s to start a new business as when you did in your 20s. And particularly, of course, as the safari industry had changed so much from when I started. You know, when I started, if you were a pioneer and an adventurer and was willing to go into the wild somewhere, pitch a tent under a tree and start offering safaris, you could do it. You could do it. You know, Africa was wide open then.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the industry has grown so much that it's not wide open, and you can't just literally pitch a tent, simple tent, and start. You know, you need a lot of money to start because you've got to compete against now what's here. But yeah, so anyway, we ended up down in Botswana. That's the country we decided to go to start again. You know, the main reason for that would have been that Botswana, you know, is a top safari destination, and it's so relatively easy to get a new business going somewhere like Botswana, as opposed to, say, you know, a lesser known country in Africa.
Okay. So what would you say has been the experience there? So you've been there for now, what, how many years? 10, 12 years?
13 years, yeah.
So from a perspective of anyone looking to go to Africa, why do you think Botswana should definitely be on the list?
Oh, I mean, because it is still an incredibly wild country with some of the greatest wildlife populations. I mean, let's face it, that's what the majority of people come to Africa for, is to see the wildlife. And, you know, with a country that's only got 2.5 million people in a landmass that's the size of France, there's a lot of space for the wildlife. And of course, the heart of that is the Okavango Delta, which I think, you know, anybody who's read anything about the wildlife of Africa or watched a few documentaries will have heard of it. I mean, it is one of the, not only is it extremely beautiful, looks, you know, similar to your Pantanal in Brazil, but it's teeming with all of Africa's iconic big game.
Yeah. So what are your favorite parts of Botswana?
Well, funny enough, having been so effusive about the Okavango, my favorite part is the Makadi salt flat, right in the heart of the country. And, you know, they're an interesting link with the Okavango. They were all once linked in this huge paleo lake, you know, the largest inland sea that Africa ever had. And the Okavango has remained there as this wetland, but the Makadi has dried up into these salt lakes. But in the wet season, in our rainy season, they fill with water again. And this exceptional rainy season we had this year, you know, double probably the normal annual rainfall. You know, they really filled up, and you would think that you were actually in the Okavango Delta when you're out there.
Yeah.
And they become probably the most important wetland. I mean, so this is an area that is dry salt flats, you know, the largest salt pan complex in the world. That they fill up with water and become the most important wetland in Southern Africa, with all of Southern Africa's greater and lesser flamingos coming to breed there, you know, plus everything else that comes there. But, you know, just the fact that all the flamingos come there to breed, you know, just shows how, you know, what an important ecological area it is. But I love it because I love big space. Now, the Okavango, of course, is also big space, but it's got big trees which block your view a bit.
Yeah.
The Makadi has just this. I mean, Botswana is a flat country, but so you don't get those great views you get from the tops of the mountains that we had when we lived in Malawi. But I get a similar feeling and experience from being in the Makadi as I would on the top of the mountain, because you can see to the horizon.
Yeah.
And of course, not just the salt pan. I mean, most people would say, why the hell would I want to go to a salt flat? But there's a lot of, I mean, the grasslands on the edge, the palm tree islands on the edge. There's a great mix of things, and some unbelievably fascinating stuff out there, and stuff that 90% of people who have come on safari, or 90% of people who have come to Botswana on safari, won't see, will have missed out on. But I, in my private safari capacity, private guiding capacity, I would always pencil in the Makadi first. And it's about, not as I say, it's all these interesting things that are out there, but it's the space, and that the silence, the tranquility, the solitude you get out there.
Yeah. So what are there beyond the Okavango and then this Makadi? What other areas would you recommend people have a look out for?
So obviously Okavango and Makadi, they're the two big, sort of features. They're 2 feet. Both those features can be seen from space.
Yeah.
The greenery of the Okavango and the whiteness of the salt flats. And they're surrounded by, I mean, they're all in the Kalahari. Botswana is the Kalahari. The Kalahari Desert, I mean, it's obviously it's not a true desert, it's a semi-arid desert.
Yeah.
There's plenty of vegetation, and we get an average rainfall from 250 mils to 500 through the desert. But those areas are surrounded by Kalahari. But right up in the north, you have the whole Chobe-Linyanti river system that are tributaries of the Zambezi. So that's a very, and huge elephant concentrations coming out of the dry bush onto those river systems, plus all the other game. And the Chobe rivers, spectacular to go out on a boat. And then down in the south, it's lesser known as a tourism area. You get the Kalahari Transfrontier Conservation Park, one of these parks that has been joined with its neighboring countries by the organization, the Peace Parks Foundation, which is a really interesting organization to research and read about. And they've tried to create peace parks, i.e. parks that cross national boundaries, where these different nations work together with the same conservation policies.
Yeah.
And then right in the heart of the country, you also have the Central Kalahari Game Reserve, which is one of the largest protected areas in the whole of Africa. And that was set aside originally as a place for the sand. So yeah, I guess probably like a Native American reservation. That has changed a bit now, sadly, through government policies, but it's left this very, very wild area to visit. And if you really want to get away from people, that's a place to go. It's very popular with people doing self-drives, hiring a 4x4, just going out there and camping.
Yeah.
Botswana's, it's known for its very sort of high cost, low volume tourism, particularly in the Okavango. That's the model in the Okavango to minimize the impact on the environment. So you have these huge concession areas with only a maximum of 50 beds allowed in them. And, the concession areas will be 1,500 to 2,000 square kilometers. But there is plenty of other opportunities, for other levels of tourism. So the self-drive market is very, very popular.
Okay. So what is it about safaris that you enjoy so much? So like sharing Africa with people, what is it particularly you like?
Yeah, I think it's, firstly, you're working. Some people tell us we're not working.
Yeah.
We're just living our life, but you're working in an environment that you love, and obviously we're incredibly fortunate to have that. And I've been incredibly fortunate to work and live in some of the most wild and beautiful places of Africa. And my wife might question that a bit, but for me, it's been the dream. I've lived the dream life, and obviously sharing that with people, and and inspiring people. And I think for many years it was getting people to open their eyes to the smaller things. It's not just about the big game. Yes, of course everybody wants to see the big game, but I think you have to, in the old days you had to really work hard to see the wildlife.
Yeah.
And it really was about the experience of being in the African bush. It wasn't necessarily about what you saw. It was about the whole experience. And that has moved on a bit, the industry now, where I think people do or hope to see, the big five on their first safari. My boss in Zambia back in the 80s, his parents, didn't see a leopard for 9 safaris, that sort of thing. Whereas now people expect to see a leopard, and one accepts that that's the industry has changed. But and it's a good thing. It gets more people through here, and the more we can generate tourism dollars, the better for conservation.
Yeah.
But I think now for me, what I love is also just making sure people are aware, and opening their eyes to the challenges in Africa. It's not just a pretty picture. It's not just a beautiful lodge and an elephant or a lion around every corner. And and of course, a lot of people think that the whole of Africa is like that. It's not. In between these parks and reserves, obviously we're lucky in Botswana, as I've mentioned, because we have, one of the great things about the country, an elephant can walk from one side of the, in one side and go out the other side of the country. But a lot of Africa is not like that now. And in between, there's impoverished people, and a lot of people don't see that. And I think it's important for people to learn when they come here that the challenges and the conservation challenges and the social challenges and the human conflict that goes on, and that I know everywhere the environment needs help, but if people want Africa's wildlife to continue, that Africa needs help with it, because the rest of the Western nations have the wealth, and they need to really to help these developing nations. A rich rancher in, say, Wyoming is not going to allow a wolf on his farm.
Yeah.
But he'd probably get pretty upset if he heard that a local villager had shot a lion. And that's not it. So we've got to allow the communities, these local communities that live alongside this wildlife, they really must start to benefit from it. And obviously they've benefited to a certain extent now, through employment and stuff, but we've now got to empower them, so that they become owners of it.
So when you say empower them, how do you suggest that happens?
Well, first of all, education, the first thing. It's really important that the education, and it's not. I had a very interesting meeting just this week with a local community trust, and the manager of the trust, made a really good point. Is that there's no point in us providing all this education, and one of the things we do to support the community is sponsor education, but there's no point providing all that training if there's a finite number of jobs. So of course his position is, what we have to do is train people to be able to set up their own businesses so they can provide employment.
Yeah.
And that's how the local communities will ultimately lead to full ownership of what's going on out there.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So for yourself, what are your favorite animals in Botswana?
Well, my horses.
Obviously your horses. But,
no, I think I guess probably the African wild dog, the painted wolf.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, I would guess, is because they're really the only major predator in Africa who isn't any direct danger to humans. So you can interact with them on a much more, I wouldn't say, not a personal is probably not the right word, but in a safe way, out on foot and on horses. It's extraordinary to see how the dogs, these painted wolves, and the horses ignore each other.
Yeah.
Whereas a horse, of course, is not going to ignore even the smell of a lion. And it's, you wonder, how does the horse know that? How does the horse know that the smell of a wild dog isn't a threat to them? Because wild dogs, even though they are the most successful hunters, don't take down prey species the size of a horse. But how does a horse know that? Yet they know the smell of a lion is not a pleasant thing for them. And I guess we'll never know the answer to that. And that's something, to be honest, I love about the bush. I mean, we're always striving to have the answers to everything. And of course, now there's a multitude of apps and field guides and research papers on, the wildlife of Africa. But I would like some secrets to remain, and not to have an explanation for everything.
Yeah, very true. Leaves a little bit more, I guess, makes it more of an adventure not to know everything. So you can go there and understand you're never going to understand everything, and you don't have to understand everything. You just have to have the experience.
Well, exactly. And the fact that, we're not the all-knowing species. That these other species have these secrets, and whether it's communication methods or behavioral reasons for what they're doing, that we don't understand why.
Yeah. So what have been some of your more memorable experiences? Like, I know it's a challenging question, but I guess it's a question to try and elicit some experiences you've had to kind of like, a standout, something you'd tell a story around a bushfire or something like that to kind of like relate to someone what it is actually like to be in Africa. So what would be some of your more memorable experiences?
No, I mean, obviously, after all these years, I mean, I've been incredibly fortunate with the experiences I've had. And, but I mean, because of my passion of horses, and for me, I mean, I started horse safaris, one, because I've always loved horses, but also because I think horses and big, wide, open, wild spaces go together. It's that whole cowboy thing, isn't it? And so, of course, some of my, most memorable experiences have been on horseback. And I guess the one, I mean, we often at the end of a safari, at a week safari, will say to the guest, okay, what was the highlight of your safari? But, no, you don't think about it. It must be what comes to mind straight away.
Yeah.
We give them the opportunity to say their low light later as well.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you asked me, immediately to me comes to mind. So we had been fly camping, and fly camping means going out and setting up a very simple camp. You're away from your fixed camp, and you're just eating out under the stars. You have small dome tents and that sort of thing. And we were going to set, and this was on the edge of the Makadi Pan, so we were going to set off. It was warm, it was September, so we wanted to get going before the sun came up, or as early as possible. So we're obviously up in the dark, and then we set off, and there ahead of us were these beautiful, beautiful miles and miles of yellow grasslands. What you think of in Africa.
Yeah.
And away on the left was the white of this salt pan just stretching away as far as you could see. And on the right was the woodlands, the Kalahari sort of scrubby woodlands. And there was not I think there was one ostrich to be seen, but it was beautiful. It was quiet. And I said to the guests, right, we're going to have a nice fast canter through here. I know that stretch of ground, there's no holes to worry about. And you're going to get yourself into this pace with the horse and enjoy it as you watch the sun come up over the salt pan. And of course, when you've got a flat terrain like that with a salt pan with no trees, you see the sun coming from the horizon.
Yeah.
And at night, you see the stars coming from when you see something like Venus come over the horizon, it looks like a truck suddenly appearing over the horizon.
Yeah. Awesome.
And but anyway, so we set off on this canter, thinking that, you know, that is just going to be this beautiful, the emptiness of Africa, and enjoying that. But little did we realize that in the woodlands there were a large number of zebra, because we have this massive, the second biggest, you know, animal migration in Africa. You know, this zebra migration we get through Botswana, and we didn't and had no idea they were in the woodlands. But you know, when zebra, because they're a flight animal, when they hear the thundering of hooves, they think something's happening, we must also move.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, we were 10 horses, so we were making a bit of noise, kicking up some dust. And the next thing, these zebras started streaming out of the woodland. And we ended up with 3,000 zebra cantering with us, all around us. And, you know, they were picking up the pace, and our horses were picking up pace. And, you know, you could just feel the joy of the horses. You know, the horses were loving it, you know, just going, running with these. They love being in a herd. So imagine you're a horse and suddenly you're in a herd of 3,000. Yeah. And yeah, I'll never forget that. And even telling you about it now is making my heart pump a bit.
Yeah. No, it sounds like quite an experience. I mean, you know, I can imagine the 10 people or 9 people you were with, you know, like this would be an awesome experience, because like surrounded by zebra, because normally you'd be seeing them from a distance, wouldn't you, running past you, but now you're actually part of it.
Well, yeah, I'm being in, you know, being right in the middle of that, you know, zebra, you know, on the move. And you know, I think that's, you know, definitely something about, you know, the horse safaris and the walking safaris we do is, you know, you're immersing yourself in the bush. You know, vehicle safaris, they're wonderful things. You know, you see a lot of wildlife, you get very close to the wildlife, you take wonderful photographs. Let me tell you, on a horse or on a walking safari, you take crap photos. Yeah. On a horse, you're shaking all over the place, and when you're walking, you're far too, you know, alert and concentrating on what's all around you to really be worrying about photographs. But yeah, I mean, you know, I hope those people I was with never forget the experience they had. And of course, there's many others. I mean, you know, and you know, one has to be honest about safaris. You know, these really special moments, you know, only happen once or twice on a safari.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, that's what people have to, you know, they have to relax into it and really just enjoy everything that's around them. And you know, one of my passions is birding, and you know, we have so many people who will, you know, come along and they're like, oh, why are we looking at a bird? But you know, at the end of the week, when people are buying the bird guidebooks or you know, signing up to the bird apps, you know, you just know then you've actually had some, you know, impact, and you know, you have, you know, changed their lives in a little way.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, well, now let's talk a little bit about your safari side of things, a little bit more detail. So, can you walk us through a typical itinerary for your walking and riding safaris? Because a lot of people may not have considered these as options, because obviously the 4x4 is the most common way people envisage going on safari. So maybe you can give us a little bit more detail about both of them, and then what a typical day or time on safari would look like.
Yeah, that's two pretty difficult things to because obviously there's no typical day and there's no typical itinerary. You know, we offer so many different options. But yeah, I mean, on the horse safaris, one of the things, you know, when we moved to Botswana, we thought you know, as I mentioned earlier, it's not easy to get in and build a fixed camp anymore and stuff. So we said, well, you know, let's stay as mobile as we can and offer alternatives. Let's become a horse operator that offers different horse rides in Botswana, because there are these amazingly different areas. And at the same time, we wanted to say, well, you know, we so believe that the experience of being on horseback amongst Africa's wildlife, is such a special experience that, we want to be able to try to offer it to people who don't ride as well.
Yeah.
So our core business, of course, is for experienced riders. When we ride in the Okavango Delta, we're riding with a lot of, big game, potentially dangerous wildlife. So you need to be, an intermediate to experienced rider. Riding in the Makadi salt flats on our big long safaris, you obviously also need to be, a competent rider. Just because it isn't necessarily the dangerous wildlife around, but there's long distances and you can imagine some quite fast riding on those salt flats. It's the largest horse racetrack in the world.
Yeah.
You let that horse go, it will go. And I mean, we've had horses run away and they've literally run flat out 30 or 40 kilometers across the pan.
Yeah.
To go and find them. So those are the two big rides we do. But in order to be able to offer it to others, we offer riding, like an hour or 2 hours riding out of the 3 camps in the Makadi. And even though, there are a few lions and elephant out there, but it's very open country. So we're not going to be surprised. What we don't like on a horse safari is to be surprised.
Yeah.
Because obviously you're on a flight animal, you're on a prey animal. A lion is not looking at you on the horse as the prey, it's looking at the horse as the prey. So we don't want to be surprised. But because of the open nature of the Makadi, we can take beginner riders. And that's we find, people, people, when we're riding out in that area, there's people out there in vehicles and you can just see them sitting in their vehicle. I'm not really too rude, but they're shivering in the cold. They're a little bit, especially the children, they're a little bit sort of sleepy in the back. And you can see they're envious when they go past us. Of us, we're active, we're just out there. When you're in the car, you're one step separated from the wildlife when you're in a vehicle. So people love that to, it's something different to do. And I think when people come on a safari, it's, of course it's about the wildlife, but they must also, it's a holiday, and they must have as many different experiences as possible. Yeah. So, and I think that's what we can offer there. And certainly when I do my privately guided trips, they also try to put that in. And especially, when you're dealing with families, all of us who've had kids know they need to be entertained. But they don't need complicated entertainment. Just getting out of the car on the Makadi salt flats and being able to run around and go and say, "Oh, what's that?" And that's a Stone Age tool at their feet.
Yeah.
That's awesome experience for children. And then we base our horses just outside Maun on a private wildlife reserve here, and so that's another very popular place for beginners to ride. There's no, there's large game like giraffe, but there's no dangerous game.
Yeah.
And again, we'll have people come and stay at that lodge. It's not the Okavango, it's not the Makadi. It's a private fenced wildlife reserve. Which of course in Botswana, people like, well, why would you go there if you've got the Okavango and the Makadi? But the reason you go there is because of the horses. And again, the children, especially the girls, they love being around the horses. So it's like we all know kids. Their favorite holiday really is just to go and play on a beach.
Yeah.
So you give them the opportunity to play around with horses. They love their safari.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what's the normal time frame for one of your walking or horse riding safaris?
So the walking safaris, at the moment, we really just promote 3 nights. And the reason we do that is because most of Botswana's safari tourism is this lodge circuits that you've mentioned, and so people tend to go 3 nights. So we thought, well, we need to fit into that. We need to be able to say to people, you can go to your lodge, you can then come and walk with us for 3 nights, have a completely different experience, not only the walking experience, because the area we walk in, there's no road access whatsoever. So there's no road, there's no saying, oh, well, we've heard a lion over there. Okay, well, let's get in the car and go and sit.
Yeah.
We're just on foot and with the makoros, the traditional dugout canoes. So if we want to go, we either have to wade across to another island, or we have to take a makoro and go across and then explore on foot another island. So it's very, very wild. We have liked to offer much longer walking safaris, and we have done that. But that's for a niche adventurer who just says that's all I want to do.
Yeah.
The horse safaris are longer. In the Okavango, they're in it, well, up to 7 nights, and again they're mobile, so you're moving every 2 nights. The whole camp is moved by these dugout canoes, the makoros.
Yeah.
Or of course, the Okavango is not always full of water. Sometimes the water levels drop and or dries up, and you can't use the makoros. And so even though we could drive a vehicle in there then to move the camp, we decided for 2 reasons we didn't want to do that. We wanted to really be offering a truly environmentally friendly experience, and also making sure that part of that truly environmentally friendly experience is to making sure that local communities benefit, the communities that live on the edge of the Okavango. And that's obviously we hire their makoros, and they pole the makoros to move the camp.
Yeah.
So of course they go, well, what do you do when it's dry and there's no poling for them? So we said, okay, we hire your donkeys, and you bring the donkeys. So they come as donkey handlers, and they bring 20 donkeys, and the whole camp is moved around the Okavango by 20 donkeys.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
yes, very, 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 very different to what majority of visitors to Botswana would do.
no, definitely. I mean, I guess if you're looking for a more intimate kind of experience, this definitely is the way to go. I mean, as you said, with a car, you're kind of like one step removed, aren't you? So you're not really in there with it. So the walking safari where you're kind of having to pay attention to everything, I think that's perfect for people, because, even if you bring your kids, because they'll be sitting there going, oh, I'm in the car, okay, wait, this is pretty boring. But when they're walking around and they think they know they're in wildlife, suddenly they do have to pay attention. So it means you actually become really aware of what you're doing, so you really get the experience rather than just like ticking it off the box. Yeah, I was sitting in a car and I went there and I saw a couple of lions here and an elephant. Okay, that was a cool safari. Here you're actually experiencing it.
No. I mean, that's absolutely how it is. And I think there'll always be lots of people who don't want that experience. But if people, a lot of people, when they come to Africa, once they've been here, they fall in love with Africa and they want to keep coming back. And it's those type of people, what I call the safari connoisseurs, who will look for the more immersive experience, the more what I would also describe as a genuine experience. Where they've ticked off everything already. And now they just want to really get to understand and learn about Africa and its wildlife, big and small.
Yeah. No, awesome. So beyond safaris, what other experiences are there to have in Botswana?
So, I mean, Botswana and, the Botswana-Namibia border, on the, so the western side of Botswana is the heart of the remaining San communities, the Bushmen. And like, obviously tragically, like all, indigenous people, those are dying cultures. But, the San are the original people of Africa. And, it's possible to go and do safaris with them and, go and camp out in that remote area of the Western Kalahari and go and spend days with them, whether it's, following their traditional hunting ways.
Yeah.
Or, gathering. Of course, there's a lot of gathering of various nuts and seeds. And, just really trying to, I mean, those are the real people of Africa. I mean, I myself as a guide, even after 35 years, I mean, I'm going to be telling you the basics, really
Yeah.
compared to what they can tell you, because they've lived it, and everything means something to them, whether it's food, medicinal, or spiritual. Everything around them is important, and of course, as a culture, where they totally share in culture, there's some real lessons to be learned there. And then, further north, you have the famous Sedillo Hills. This is the greatest rock art in Africa. There's over 5,000 paintings up there. And so there's that whole sort of ancient peoples, culture to experience, as well as, of course, the other, cultures here in Botswana. There's a multitude of different tribes. I mean, obviously the Swana people make up the majority, but you've got Herero, who came over from Namibia during the, when they fled during the German genocide of the Herero. And I love those people because they're real horse people.
Yeah.
And then you have the Baye, who are the original people of the Okavango, who, their whole lives were about moving around and fishing with using the Makoros. And so, of course, you can just having a Makoro experience in the Okavango is an opportunity to really, understand, not just about, feeling the tranquility, but it's getting to understand how the people always used to move around there.
Yeah.
So there's, those would be your major other, and I mean, and of course the Okavango. We'll think of the Okavango as this, huge delta, but it comes down in the main river that we call the Panhandle, the Okavango River. It flows all the way from the Angolan highlands. It's gone about 1,200 kilometers before it even reaches Botswana, and then it comes in what we call the Panhandle, where it's all papyrus reed beds, and so there's a lot of really good fishing up there.
Yeah.
And just if you want to really understand the Okavango, you need to see that part of it, where these just endless papyrus reed beds, the home of the Sitatunga antelope, the very rare Sitatunga antelope. This almost aquatic antelope that lives deep in the delta, which you wouldn't find in most of the delta, because it only lives off the papyrus.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean that I think those are the things we would include in if we're putting together private safaris, if that interested people.
Yep. So how many days do you recommend people allocate to visiting Botswana to get a good initial taste? I mean, obviously it's a pretty large place, so you can't kind of like go deep on everything, but if you're time limited, what would you recommend as a minimum the number of days you should spend in Botswana?
365. No, I mean, the problem is nobody's got time these days, do they? I mean, it's all changed. I mean, when I first came on safari, people would come for 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And a lot of our horse safaris now, people are just specifically coming to do a horse safari, and they just come for a week. Well, that's their choice, but I think that's it's sad that there's so little time.
Yeah.
People's lives now, but I guess the average length of the safari would be about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Get to you'll have time to spend in all the different habitats.
Yep.
And get a multitude of different experiences.
Okay. And what's the best time of year from your perspective to visit?
Well, from our perspective, it's quite challenging, because the Makadi, you want to see the zebra and wildebeest migration, you need to come in January to March.
Yeah.
But January to March, of course, is our wet season. Now, the wet, by saying the wet season, I could put people off. They think, well, we're not going to go to Africa just to be rained on. So, a few years ago, the marketing gurus changed it to the emerald season.
Okay.
But, we don't worry about the rains in Botswana, because we only get 400 millimeters a year on average. So it's not like my home of Malawi up in tropical Africa, when the rainy season came, it came. You know, I mean, when I first moved to Botswana, you know, and it's pretty hot building up to the rainy season.
Yeah.
And you know, you're waiting and the clouds build up and you get the thunder and lightning, and if you're lucky you get a good dollop of rain and you think, oh, it's come, the rainy season is here. And you know, you wake up the next morning and it's blue skies and you don't see a cloud for another 3 weeks. So that's the rainy season in a typical rainy season in Botswana. Obviously there's always some exceptions, like this year was just, yeah, wonderful rains.
Yeah.
So, you know, people shouldn't be put off by coming really at any time of the year. But I mean, in the Okavango Delta, the peak season, and the peak season really in all of Southern Africa for wildlife viewing is as the dry season progresses. And as the water holes, you know, after the rains start drying up and the wildlife starts to rely on the permanent bodies of water rather than the rain-filled pans, water holes. So, you know, that would be, you know, the season really starts, or you're firing up here May and going on right through to November. Of course, the latter half of that, October, November, if the rains haven't come, you know, it can be a bit hot for some people.
Yeah.
So the peak months are July and August, and that's when you're going to pay the highest prices, of course, as well.
Yeah. Okay. So any kind of like bridge months, so like April, May would be a good time as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you could ask many guides in Africa, in Southern Africa, and they'd say probably May is one of their favorite months because the rains have ended and you've just got this, you know, everything looks beautiful. But the most important thing is this clarity of light. Everything's still sharp and clear. Because of course in Africa, you know, as the dry season progresses, we get dust build up and Africa burns. You know, a lot of fires throughout Africa. And, you know, fires in Malawi can affect the atmosphere here in Botswana. So I think, yeah, May is just a staggeringly beautiful month. You know, wildlife is starting to come out of the deep woodlands where they've been during the rains and look for the more permanent water, but it's still green and, you know, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, a lot of people come, for the birds, and you know, the emerald season is the best time for the birds because all the migrants have come from Europe, and you know, we have the Amma falcons that come from the Amma River in China that appear in their hundreds down here.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's a really good, wonderful time for bird watching during the rainy season.
Awesome. So what's left on your bucket list as far as Africa? I mean, you've traveled quite extensively. You've lived in a number of different places. So what's left for you? So do you have a list of things you would still like to see?
Well, of course. But I mean, as I always say to people, they always say, why did you go and visit? And, you know, aren't you interested in the rest of the world? And I said, well, you know, sort of, but really there's still millions of trees in Africa that I haven't pitched my tent under yet.
Yeah.
And, and you know, there's nothing better just going into a new area and pitching your tent and just exploring at a slow pace of what's around you and learning something new. But I guess, you know, as I say, I've been incredibly lucky. So, you know, I've trekked with the gorillas and trekked with the chimpanzees, and of course, you know, with those habituated animals, you know, wild animals like the chimps and the gorillas, and like the meerkats in the Makadi, which is, to me, is just as an incredible experience as being with the mountain gorillas. But yeah, I think I'd like to spend more time in the central part of Africa where you have the jungle. So you know, the Congo, Gabon, Central African Republic, you know, those places where it's so different to the savannah that we really know, and you know, those famous bays in the heart of these areas, you know, where you get these salt licks and everything congregates. And for me, to be honest, personally, the birds. I mean, I have a friend who has a little place up on a tributary of the Congo, and and he sends me the lists of the birds he's seeing and the lists of the small mammals that, you know, to be honest, I've not heard of any of them.
Yeah.
So I need to go and need to go and expand one's knowledge there. Yeah, I mean, that definitely would be where I'd be heading, you know, if I had an opportunity.
Okay, awesome. So now tell us a little bit about the journey you did last year. So you embarked on a 53-day, 1,500-kilometer horse riding journey around northern Botswana. So quite an incredible adventure. So maybe give us the highlights, you know, why you undertook it, you know, what the experience was like, and, you know, are you going to do it again?
Well, I'd love to do it again, but whether one, you know, has the opportunity, because we are hoping that safari in the business will start up again, tourism will start up again soon, and then of course one just gets busy. That was really, you know, a real silver lining to the fact that of COVID was having the opportunity to do it, but also a necessity to do it. We'd you know, shutting your safari business down, you know, when you just own vehicles is easy. When you've still got 40 horses to feed, it's not so easy. And so, you know, we had realized that we had to, you know, do something to try and raise some money. And initially, to be honest, I actually thought, well, let me go and help with just doing some anti-poaching. Not anti-poaching, but more wildlife monitoring, just riding in the areas, just having a presence, you know, and when the presence is a natural deterrent, and being able to, you know, anything you saw, you could report to the appropriate authorities. But I realized, you know, if I did that, I needed to, you know, I had to make it, formalize it. Otherwise, you know, people weren't going to make any contributions to, you know, financial contributions to that, unless it was formalized. And, you know, everybody got on board, except unfortunately the final step with the final government authority. And so just realized it wasn't going to happen. So I'd had for you know, a few years been muttering to my wife that I wanted to take a horse and disappear into Africa for a while. And the reason for that is because, you know, people who do, you know, who hike, you know, they go on great hiking expeditions. People who cycle go on great cycling expeditions. People who canoe go on great canoeing expeditions. You know, people who sail go on great sailing. And I'm thinking, God, I've got all these horses. You know, surely I could do a big trip on a horse.
Yeah.
So we thought, well, let's do that as our and you know, we were very fortunate. You know, people were incredibly generous in their contributions to us, which is really what is, you know, keep our horses fed and our staff employed, which is, you know, is equally important. You know, not having to lay off any of our staff. But you know, then I mean, so to be honest, we've just planned. We hardly planned it. We decided, and 2 weeks later we left. But one thing we did realize, that there was no way I was just disappearing into the Kalahari alone, because, you know, water is crucial for horses.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you know, there are many horses in the world who have learned to adapt and go for long periods without water. And interestingly, these zebra populations in the Kalahari have also learned to go 4 or 5 days. Yet most horse owners would, you know, first thing I'd tell you that their horses need at least 50 liters of water a day.
Yep.
So we realized we had to have some, you know, vehicle support, and there's some other unemployed guides very kindly agreed to come along as backup. And then it was like, well, you know, there's places in Botswana that I've always wanted to go, and let's tie those all in together on the horses, which is why it sort of ended up becoming a little longer than I anticipated. And to be honest, we put it out there when we were trying to raise funds to say it was a 1,000-kilometer ride, which shows how pretty hopeless I am at guiding and geography, that it ended up as 1,500, because it was the same route that we thought we were doing. And yeah, we left Maun, which is the heart of where we live and which is the gateway to the Okavango, and rode north right up to the Chobe River, the northern boundary of Botswana. And then we rode down the boundary between Zimbabwe and Botswana, which is both those legs were incredibly wild. I mean, going northwards, we went 9 days without seeing any standing water. I think we went 7 days without seeing another person. Obviously, we were doing it right in the middle of COVID when we weren't supposed to be out there.
Yeah.
And the international boundary with Zimbabwe is a major wildlife area because it borders on Zimbabwe side. You have Nyika National Park, one of the most famous parks in Africa. And then we said, right, let's also. I always wanted to get down to the southeast corner of the Makadi Pans. We operate more in the sort of north center, and I wanted to go down there because you have these 50-meter high sort of range of hills there, which are the hills that rose up and blocked off this massive river, which created this massive inland sea that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And in those hills, you can see all the different, millions of years of fossils and all of that interesting stuff, and seashells and all of that. So yeah, we then went round down there, which was I described the earlier parts as being wild, but that was really wild, and actually a frightening place because of the lack of water.
Yeah.
And I remember my wife was riding with me on the one day, so of course an added responsibility, and we failed to meet up with our support vehicle, and you got through your 2 liters of water, and the horses have had no water, and yeah, there was a tense, about a 5-hour period of wondering what do we do. Yeah, we'd had sat phones. Obviously we had taken off, and the sat phones for that. Some reason that day decided not to talk to each other, and yeah, it was a different world down there. I felt that I knew the Makadi reasonably well, having ridden it a lot, but that part of Makadi is completely different, and so much so that you think that this is a salt flat, dry salt flat, but you step 5 meters away from the grass and the horses were sinking in.
Yeah.
Subsequently spoke to a fellow who did 5 years research there, and he said there's so much water under there that there's a tide, and so it's dry on the surface, but you can travel across it in the morning, and when you come back the same route in the afternoon, the water underneath has shifted with the tide and you'll start sinking in. So that was a major lesson I learned down there. And then we came round the bottom and we hit the Batete River. Now the Batete River is what links the Okavango to the Makadi. And there's a fascinating river historically, because it's the river that when David Livingstone, the first European, or the first European who documented his travels, managed to get across the Kalahari. He found the Batete River and then traveled up the Batete River, fresh water. And there's a lot more history, going on after that, from a European perspective. And we had this sort of romantic. Fortunately, the river had started flowing. It'd been totally dry 6 months before, and it had, our flood waters that came from Angola last year were big enough to go right on down there. And we had this romantic image that we ride home all the way along the river, because I live on the Thamalakane River that flows into the Batete River. But I wouldn't say it was romantic, because of course, in these modern times, there's a lot of agriculture, a lot of fences that we had to try and get round, and they build the fences out into the water.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was challenging, and but yeah, a lot of fun. The team I had were fantastic. One of them rode each day with me, and they swapped around from the support vehicle to riding with me. And to be honest, I didn't want to stop. I can really understand, that whole sort of, I suppose, that gypsy lifestyle. The simplicity of it. I think what I really loved about it was 53 days of just sleeping in a bedroll under the stars, And it's just you and the horses. There's nothing else to worry about. It's just about making sure you get up early enough, look after the horses, make sure they're fed, make sure they're groomed, make sure they've got no injuries, and have your early morning coffee and get on and a rusk and get on the horse and then ride until it gets hot, and repeat that day after day, but of course in a different place. So for example, when I'm exercising horses here in a build up to a safari season, you're riding the same area, and I've got a son who's a fantastic rider, but he's not interested in doing that.
Yeah.
You're basically riding around the same block. But doing something like that is, you don't know what's ahead of you. You don't know how far you're going to get. So I really, I don't want to enthuse about it too much because, I'm supposed to have done it as a hardship to raise some funds. But obviously, I got a lot of positives out of it, and would love to do another one. But one has to, one also has to think about the business.
No, definitely.
So, my actual dream is to try and do something without that vehicle support.
Yeah.
As you've got from the impression I hope you have given of the safaris we do in the Okavango, where we don't have vehicle support. So I've got this sort of dream to take some of these donkeys so that they can carry water and walk it with them. And donkeys, they're wonderful things. They're so much easier than horses.
Yeah.
A horse gets a rope wrapped around his leg, it freaks out and panics, and a donkey just stands there. So I'd like to ride up the western edge, walk up the western edge of the delta with donkeys carrying the water and whatever else, and then get in a Makoro and hold myself all the way back down through the delta. So that's I wouldn't do that alone. It wouldn't be safe just to be out there by yourself. So the polling part would be important to have some good people around you.
Yeah.
So the great thing about Maun as a town, there's lots of adventurers here.
Okay. So watch your space. The next adventure is going to happen soon.
Well, it will if things don't, obviously things haven't turned around as quickly as people in the tourism industry worldwide, I guess, have hoped for. But if it continues like it is, then we might have to do something like that. But, either that, or we have to build the business to a level where I can have other people, running it, and then I can go off and live those dreams.
No, definitely. So to finish up on Botswana, what's the number one reason why you think someone should add Botswana to their bucket list?
Because without a doubt, it's one of the greatest wildlife areas in Africa and one of the last really wild countries in Africa. With amazing wildlife, but really actually limited number of visitors. So you're not going to have any of those, well, obviously choose where you go, but in most of the places you will not have any of those safari experiences that I think shock a lot of us, when you've got 30 cars all following a lion.
Yeah.
This is about true wilderness here. And that's, I think everybody probably listening to us knows that that's a rarer and rarer thing in the world these days.
Yeah, definitely. No, sounds great. So to close up, few questions left. So what's your definition of living your best life, or what I call a legendary life?
I've got my wife listening. I have to be careful what I say. I made a decision, to not to follow the career I should have done, and to follow something that I was passionate about. And I think, for my children, that's what I just hope, that they will choose something that they're passionate about and not be driven by society, and not be driven by the whole sort of the Western expectations of the money you must make.
Yeah.
We've been fortunate enough, of course, to have at some stages of our lives made some money, but it's been much more about just really enjoying the African bush and really just living what one's passion is. I think that's the most important thing.
No, very good. So do you have a life motto you live by?
Yeah, well, always, I guess it's always look, I always want to see what's over the other side of the next hill, or around the other side of the next island in the Okavango, or around the next bend in the river, and that has led to some wonderful things, but also can lead to some dramatic things.
Yeah.
I do have a number of regular clients who go, "Oh my God, here David's off again. Now what's going to happen?"
Yeah. Awesome.
And turn into long days, which they weren't expecting.
Yeah. So to finish up, what are 3 life lessons you've learned in life that you think would be of value for other people?
Crikey, Damien. I mean, I'm not the greatest philosopher, but well, as I said, live your passion and don't be afraid to follow it. And also, just focus on what's important. And in my case, what's important is the conservation of Africa's wildlife. So even though I run a business in it, behind that is my belief that that we have to conserve Africa's wildlife for future generations, and that means sacrificing some of your income in order to ensure that other people, particularly the local communities, benefit from it. But apart from that, also just what's important. We all know really what's important is of course is having our family and friends, and giving time to them. And I think COVID's probably made us much more aware of that.
Very good. So, well, David, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I'm sure a lot of people will now be looking to make plans to head over to Botswana. So to help people out, how can they find you online and learn a little bit more about yourself, and also Ride Botswana and David Foot Safaris?
Yeah, so we have 2 websites. We have ridebotswana.com, and then we have davidfootsafaris.com. But there's a multitude of safari operators here. It's big business here, so there's a lot of websites about what's on offer here. But yeah, we'd welcome any emails. I have time in my hands to answer them. And yeah, we have a Facebook page as well, 2 Facebook pages, Instagram pages, all under those same names.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, Damon, we're very nice to have chatted to you, and hopefully we'll meet you in person one day.
Yeah.
Brazil or Botswana.
Yes, definitely.